Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome again to another one of our lecture series. I'm glad you were able to come. Hopefully you guys made it to our Ford versus Ferrari movie that was this month, and hopefully you enjoyed that. My name is Bruce Patton. I'm a curator here at the Savoy, if I haven't met you, so please come up and say hi to me sometime. But what I want to do is just kind of cover, kind of how we're going to go about the lecture. So we'll have Brandon come up and he's going to give his presentation and talk. We'll open it up for questions and answers. We'll have microphones that we'll be able to pass out for the questions and answers. And then at the end, we'll have a few minutes if you want to come down here, get some pictures by the car, that kind of thing. So I think we should be able to get all that done by 8:30, so we can get you out of here at 8:30. I did want to mention that coming up, we have another event in October, another lecture series. It's going to be with Ted Stevens and Tim Welburn, and that'll be, I think it's October 22nd. And so they'll be talking about Mopars, muscle cars, and more. So put that on your calendars so you can come back and enjoy that presentation. So I'd like to go ahead now and introduce Brandon Starks. He's the executive director at the Brumos Museum down in Jacksonville, Florida. And he was kind enough to come up here, and he's going to talk a little bit about himself in the museum, and then also talk here about the Watson Roadster that's sitting here that they were kind enough to loan to us for our Indy Roadsters. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed the Great Hall there with the Indy Roadsters. And we only have those here until October 2nd, I believe. And then we're going to be doing what's called Fast Brass. And we have a lot of brass era, mainly race cars, that will be going down the Great Hall for 4 months. So hopefully you'll enjoy those too. So I'd like to go ahead and introduce Brandon. So thanks, Brandon.
Thank you. The Brumos Collection in Jacksonville, Florida. I don't know if many of you have heard of us, but I appreciate the opportunity to tell you a little bit about us. I'm going to walk over here. We are relatively kind of new to this museum world ourselves, and what I'll do tonight is kind of cover a little bit of a background about who Brumos is, what Brumos is, and tell you a little bit about me and how I got to be where I am. I've been the beneficiary of having quite a few really great jobs. This being one of them, and it's been a kind of a wonderful journey so far. So my background is in automotive retail. I started out with the Brumos companies in car dealerships in 2004. Worked at both Lexus and then at Brumos Porsche, and then was the final general manager of Brumos Porsche, and then stayed on to become the first general manager of Porsche Jacksonville once the dealership sold to the Fields Automotive Group. I'm guessing if there's any kind of Porsche fans in the audience, many of you have heard of Brumos from our time on the racetrack. If you haven't, I would like to take a moment just to kind of give you a brief history of who we were, to kind of tell you who we are. Believe it or not, our company actually started in 1953, and one of the themes that's kind of carried through behind what we do is we've always been kind of owned and operated by automotive enthusiasts, particularly racing enthusiasts. So we kind of began in Miami Springs in Florida. A man named Hubert Brundage kind of had an avid amateur racing habit, for lack of a better word, and figured if he could somehow get involved in the car business, that maybe he could race more affordably. So he started selling Volkswagen cars and parts out of his hardware stores, and one thing led to another, and ultimately he became an importer distributor for Volkswagen for the Southeast United States in 1956. In 1959, he became the importer and distributor for Porsche cars for the Southeast United States. So in addition to having retail franchises that moved to Jacksonville in 1957, he also supplied 107 dealerships with their cars and parts and service. Kind of a little bit like what the JM family has created with some of their Toyota stuff is what Hubert was doing on the Porsche side. One of the interesting things is coming from the car dealership world, and in my time in sales, it was always interesting how many people would come in and say, I was a close personal friend of Mr. Brumos come car buying time. And when in fact there was no Mr. Brumos, we got our name from a telex machine. So it was Brundage Motor Cars Incorporated, and when they would communicate with the factory or to other dealers, they'd use a teletype or telex machine, and you'd have a ticker symbol. So Brundage Motors was contracted into Brumos, and that's how we got our name. 1959 is when we signed our original Porsche dealer agreement, and Hubert found it to be much more efficient to write Brumos rather than Brundage Motor Cars Incorporated all over the paperwork, and so there it began. It was growing exponentially, and unfortunately in 1964, Hubert passed away early in a motorcycle accident, and so we changed hands. We can, on the next slide. In 1964 is when we really started kind of hitting the map, because a man named Peter Gregg purchased the dealerships, the operations from Mr. Brundage's widow. Peter at the time had been a naval intelligence officer, but he was also an avid car racer and wanted to kind of be involved for the same reasons that Hubert did. Once he purchased the dealerships, he started racing more professionally. 1967 was the first year that you'll see the number 59 pop up with us quite a bit. In his time in the Navy, Peter used to fly into and around the USS Forrestal, which was a naval aircraft carrier that was based in Jacksonville. And when he flew around the ship, he used to like the way that the hull number looked on the boat. So starting in 1967, he started using the number 59 on our race cars, and now it's kind of ever present in our lives. Peter and Hurley. Peter met a guy at an autocross event named Hurley Haywood in 1967. Hurley was a student at Jacksonville University. Hurley actually beat Peter at autocross, and Peter, being the kind of guy he was, said, well, you must be pretty good if you can beat me. Why don't you come racing with me? So as soon as Hurley turned 21 years old in 1969, they went racing and won their first race that they ever competed in. At which point, as a team, Brumos won the overall Daytona 24 Hours 4 times in our history, the last one being in 1959. We won multiple INSA championships, including the first one, and we raced professionally all the way through 2013. We've kind of gained a lot of international kind of notoriety and credibility through our racing efforts. And we're actually honored with Porsche running a tribute livery of the Brumos livery, the racing colors, in 2019. And so we were able to see those cars back on a Porsche car again. We can go back one more. Let's see if I forgot anything. Yes, like I said, we competed in sports car racing throughout North America. Which included endurance racing, many 24-hour races, Sebring, Petit Le Mans here in Atlanta, and a variety of other races. Good. We most recently were able to compete in racing again for the first time, which it's been many years, but we raced the Pikes Peak International Hill Climb for the first time this year, and we're actually able to win the time attack class. David Donahue, who had driven for us in our prototype program, which is in that top right corner there, and won the 2009 24-hour race with us, was actually the driver for us again this year. That 2009 race, incidentally, we won by a whopping 0.67 seconds after 24 hours of racing. We can go to the next slide. So we sold the dealerships in 2016. Over time, Dan Davis, who was the current owner of Brumos, and his partner Bob Snodgrass had started amassing a collection of cars beginning in about 1994. In 1997, they built what they called the first Brumos Museum, which was attached to our race shop as a place to store their car collection. It was about 12,000 square feet. The way Dan tells it, he and Bob walked in the empty space and said, oh man, there's no way we're ever going to fill all this up. And about 9 months later, he says he had to tell Bob, it's getting out of hands, we're busting at the seams, we can't handle all of these cars. And so the relationship went. Once we sold the franchises, we had to find a place to go and find a new purpose, and that's what we're doing now. In our search for moving the collection, we kind of scoured the local area in Jacksonville, Florida for existing sites. One of the places we looked is the only assembly plant, automotive plant in Florida is in Jacksonville. It's a Ford plant, operated from 1924 to the mid-1960s, first assembling Model A's and Model T's, and then as a parts depot. That building is still somewhat standing, and it was something we considered when we wanted to move. It had kind of this iconic architecture. Unfortunately, it was too far gone, but we took that architecture for ourselves and we built ground up for our new facility. So we aren't quite as large as this building here, but we've kind of tried to put our own kind of take and spin on things. We opened in January of 2020. We then closed in March of 2020 because of COVID. So we reopened in January of 2021 last year. We've been able to have a lot of wonderful media receptions. We've had the Wall Street Journal, a lot of the other major automotive media come in to cover the museum, and we're really excited about what we have to offer. We're a very small group. We're a tight-knit group. There's only 6 of us on the payroll, and then we have over 60 volunteers, though, primarily sourced through our local Porsche club. We're fortunate to have a really strong group of people that came in and stepped up to help us out. We'll do the next slide. Our grounds, kind of like here, where you want it to be an experience when you arrive, this building absolutely has a presence, and so when we're kind of off the beaten path where we are, so it's a little bit of a kind of a wow factor when you come in and see the building there. We've got about 35,000 square feet. We have basically 2 existing exhibits of cars, and they're sourced primarily through our own collection. The first gallery that we have, first exhibit we have, are our 4Runner cars, our older cars. The oldest being an 1894 Peugeot that competed in the world's first ever sanctioned automobile race. And those cars go all the way up through our 63 Watson Roadster here, which we'll talk about in a minute, and kind of follow a common lineage and history. And then on our other collection is more of our Porsche cars, and we range from early 356s all the way up to modern 911 race cars. So a wide variety of things, and it's kind of built to be interactive. Each of our cars has its own digital kiosk display, so visitors are able to kind of go in and poke around and find at least 3 different stories about the cars, whether it be about the people behind the cars or the development of the cars. We have dedicated photo galleries for each car, and then a spec sheet for all the people who want to know any kind of performance data or technical information. Okay. The collection itself, we're actually rated the 13th most significant collection of cars in the world by the Key magazine. We're fortunate to kind of be custodians of a lot of one-off, very historically significant vehicles. We mainly care for race cars. What drives that passion is typically you see early innovation and invention in these race cars just because they want to make them faster, turn better, or more efficient so that they can win races. And once those technologies have proven themselves, then you start seeing them on road cars. So really the fascination for us is some of these attempts at innovating, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, and we have examples of both. And it's really interesting to kind of see that play out. And we'll skip to the next slide. So that's just a little bit about Brumos, about who we are, and it's always fun to kind of come from a Porsche background and be known for our Porsche affiliation, and then to come out and be able to discuss a little bit an old Indy car, which is actually a lot of what we do now. So this is a 1963 Watson Roadster, and this car is significant to us because it is kind of the last of a bloodline that follows through our early exhibitive cars, and it's really an interesting story and one that I've been able to familiarize myself with and learn a lot about in my current role. And it's a story that we tell throughout our collection. So our cars actually begin with Peugeot because that's kind of where a lot of the early innovation that leads to this car is. So come 1913, 1914, there's 3 drivers and a draftsman at Peugeot who asked if they could go design their own car, and they got the okay, but they put them in the corner of the engineering room. All the other engineers thought they were crazy. They called them the charlatans. Well, these charlatans came up with technologies that would be the foundation and the baseline for kind of high-performance cars even as we see them today. They developed the first race car with 4-wheel brakes, dual overhead cam engines, 4 valves per cylinder, dry sump lubrication, all of the stuff that you still see in a lot of your race cars today or a lot of your performance cars today, they created. Well, that technology makes its way over to the United States, and because World War I breaks out in Europe, and one of the Peugeots breaks, and who's going to fix it? Peugeot is making tanks and heavy equipment for the war effort, so they're not working on race cars. So a guy named Bob Berman owns one of the Peugeots, and he takes it to his friend out in Los Angeles named Harry Miller. He says, "Harry, can you fix my car?" So Harry agrees to fix it and he sees all this technology that he's never seen before. And kind of doing what race car people do, he took a lot of those ideas and created his first kind of race car, and which would become Miller race cars, which were kind of dominant Indy cars throughout the 20s and 30s. A Miller-powered car won the Indy 500 12 out of 17 years during that time frame. Most people haven't heard of them because he never made road cars, but he took that original technology, developed it, and kind of was able to get performance out of it to the extent that the cars were so dominant by the late 1920s that people were asking for them to be banned because they were tired of seeing Millers win everything. Well, through the development of his cars, Miller and his draftsman Leo Goosen came up with a design for what would later become the Auotmobile motor. And Fred Auotmobile was actually Harry Miller's lead engineer, and once Harry went out of business in 1933, Auotmobile purchased his company and went on to develop the Auotmobile motor, further kind of refined by Meyer and Drake, that would go on to power all the many of the roadsters that you'll see out in the exhibit and that were so dominant at Indianapolis. And that's what leads us to this car. So, what is a Watson Roadster? A Watson Roadster is a front engine, rear wheel drive, Auotmobile-powered race car. Believe it or not, there are only 23 of them ever made. They were inspired by Frank Curtis's design. The KK500 that you have out in the shop there was kind of the inspiration for what the Watson cars would go to be. Some of the beauty of it is that it's a combination of a lot of technologies that built up over years, done in a very simple way. So, for example, all of his chassis were drawn out in chalk with a ruler and chalk on his garage floor, and that's how they kind of created the measurements for the car when they would go to construct them, and they built all of them the same way every time. So a few of the materials would have changed later on through the years, but from 1956 all the way through 1964, the basis of the Watson Roadsters would be the same, with the 6-foot hood, the 9-foot exhaust, low to the ground, and somewhat simple in design. So, some of the advantages of the car and where Watson really made his mark was by trying to reduce the weight of the car and make it a little bit lighter to handle better around the course, and to, it's easier to, you can get power two ways. You can either add more motor or lose some weight, and so he chose to lose his weight through his use of materials and kind of restructuring how he did his framing compared to, say, the Curtis. This car would have been about 220 pounds lighter. Another difference is that you'll notice see if we can do it this way. Yeah, that'll work. And you can see, even in the car itself here, everything is offset to the left in these cars, so to help them make those left-hand turns as they're going around the racetrack. So you've got your gearbox, which, ironically is sitting right next to your leg inside the car. And then also the engine is way offset over here to the left-hand side of the car. One of the things that Miller did is a lot of the other Roadsters, they had kind of tilted the motors in it to improve the aerodynamics of the car. But Watson thought that it made more sense to have it upright and as far to the left as he could, just to help with the turning, that the turning would override any kind of aerodynamic improvement that it would have had. You'll also notice that even down to your oil tank is here on the left side of the car. So everything you can do to kind of keep the car going left as you make your way around the track is what they did. The front end would have been offset a little bit to add a little bit of stability for cornering. Kind of other interesting features. You would have had knockoff wheels, so it would have involved a lead or a copper mallet for tire changing, and you basically slam it with the mallet and it comes sweeping off. I don't know if you can see in the picture of the tires, we get asked a lot about, there's tread on one portion of the tire, and that was something Firestone was doing at the time. The track surface wasn't necessarily as good as it is today, so a little bit of the grooving helped, but it also served as a nice wear indicator for the drivers as they were running the car. So once you kind of saw those lines disappear as you were driving, you would know when it was time for a tire change at a glance, to kind of keep things easier for the drivers.
When you started the race, there were grooves all across the car?
No, it would just be on one side here. Yeah. And I've seen them offset before, and then I've seen them all on one side. But Firestones were the tire of the day, and that was their design. Car would have run on methanol, so it would have been a 55-gallon tank of methanol, which conveniently is poured in right over the burning hot exhaust pipe. And methanol burns clear, so the kind of the rule was, if you saw anyone dancing around, to spray them with a fire extinguisher. But it was quite an impressive car. This Offie would have had about 450 horsepower, 255 cubic inch. Qualifying for the Indy 500 in this time frame would have about 151 miles an hour. I think the race speed was closer to 143, 142 miles an hour, including stops. So they were moving pretty good. Yeah.
Naturally aspirated?
It is. But later on, it wasn't uncommon to see these Offie motors turbocharged, and they can actually ram a lot of air in them because it doesn't have separate heads. So it's all included in the block, so you could really put a lot of pressure in there.
Do they put baffles in the fuel tank?
This one does not have baffles. Fuel is, since we're talking about fuel is one of the most difficult things we deal with, especially with our race cars, especially these methanol cars. And so that methanol is so corrosive that, we kind of, they may have had baffles, but generally it just looks like a big round ball in there, and then you try to flush it out as much as you can. but the methanol is very difficult to work with. They would use quite a bit of magnesium and chromoly throughout the body. Later years, they kind of introduced more fiberglass in these chassis. I imagine at the end of this, you'll have time to get up and walk around. One of the interesting things inside the car that you'll see is just, if you think of it about what the experience of driving this must be like, one, you got a gearbox just there to your left that gets really hot gearbox fluid that does not like to stay in that seal from 1963 and then leaks on the floor. And you've got a car that makes incredible amounts of torque that throws your feet back and slips all over the place. It's really kind of quite amazing what these guys were able to do. So the Watson cars, they, just like the Miller cars were, they were kind of dominant in their own time. I think I have a slide. Go again. One more. Yeah, there it is. Go back, I'm sorry. Yeah, so I have a slide for the overall Indy wins for Watson cars was, 56 and then 59 through basically 64 with the exception of 1961. Very, recognizable drivers drove Watsons. They all kind of wanted to. This car in particular was driven in the 1963 Indy 500. It qualified third. It was actually led the race for a while, and at lap 198 was in third place, and he slipped on oil that is attributed to Parnelli Jones, who would go on to win, and ended up placing 15th. So he made it within 2 laps of third place before he slipped. It was a little bit of a heartache. They were pretty dominant, successful through 1964, and then in 1965, the rear engine cars came out and started kind of really dominating the field in racing. So today, we still actively use our cars. So one of the things I meant to mention earlier is, we try to be a little bit unmuseum where we are. So it's not uncommon to come in and have a race car driving around the parking lot getting tuned, or to have our workshops connected to our gallery. It's not uncommon to see the technicians working on race cars and popping a starter in one of these and popping them, getting it going. But we still take these out today. We participate in an event called the Millers at Milwaukee. If anyone's ever up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, in July, it's an amazing event, and you see some really spectacular cars up there. We've had this car out at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway before the race. That's one of my best personal memories, is I was able to drive this car on track at Indy before the 500 at some kind of speed. It was pretty amazing. And we send it around to different kind of car shows and events. Last year we had it in Tampa. It's won Best of Class at Amelia Island, and we try to spread it around and share it the best we can.
So you had my curiosity up in the photo on the screen. So that's an electric start motor?
Yeah.
A shaft off the front?
Yeah, so you'll have your battery goes in the cart there. You can see the cart behind him. And then you've got your starter that runs through a shaft through the front here, and it basically spins it over. So it's like an aircraft starter. And it's quite something to do it. So, our earlier cars, they have the hand start. So this is just that kind of on steroids.
Second question. You know if the wheels, are they aluminum or magnesium?
These are magnesium wheels. Yeah, and if you ever have the opportunity, I wish I had something. If you ever have the opportunity to hold a magnesium wheel compared to like a aluminum or steel wheel, it's really quite shocking to see the difference in those wheel weights and just the difference in the weight of the metal. It's one of the things I like to do with kids a lot, so that they can kind of just experience what that feels like. But yeah, those are all magnesium wheels. And again, they're just trying to shave weight anywhere they can. And I love question and answer.
How many Watsons are still in existence?
My understanding is that they're all still in existence. Yeah, so some in various states of restoration, but I think they're all still in existence, which goes to show you, how much they meant to people. A lot of these cars, and especially the earlier cars, what would happen is once it reached the end of its life in kind of the top tier racing, that motor might still be good for dirt track racing, or the chassis might be used for something. So a lot of times they would get cannibalized just because that's what we do as car people, right? It's still a useful part, but not on that. And you find that a lot with a lot of these cars. And so this was actually restored prior to our acquiring the car. We acquired the car about 2006. I think the restoration was done in the early 1980s, all fairly accurate. It had a couple owners in its racing life, but this was restored back to its original owner. The Konstant Hot company was like a tea kettle company out of California. They produced the warmers from like machine coffee and things like that. And this was a way that they promoted that.
Is that vintage rubber?
The wheels, the tires? No. The tires are one of the biggest challenges that we have because they're just constantly degrading, and they're needed less and less. So you rely a lot on Coker tire to make your tires, and a lot of times it ends up being like a big Sam's Club purchase. So you'll talk to your other friends who might need them too, and you go in bulk buy. But having Coker tire in the collector car world is vastly important, because otherwise you would never get to drive these things. It just wouldn't be safe.
How fast did you get it running?
I'm told I was going pretty good. The thing with this car is once you put your foot on the gas, you want to just keep it there. But it really doesn't like to slow down, and it doesn't like to turn. So you kind of do it like little mini drag races, and you go fast. I think I've driven it at Milwaukee, and I've driven it at Indy. Indy, you get much longer straightaway. So I bet I was going about 120. Yeah, you need it, and no power steering. And it's and like I said, it just makes so much torque that the wheels want to break loose. Let's see here. If there's any other views of it too that you guys would like, I'm happy to do it.
What was the major change from the first Watson to the last Watson?
Very few, actually. I guess the biggest change would have been that they started incorporating a lot more fiberglass into the build. But other than that, I mean, that's one of the things that they were known for. And they had they didn't make a whole lot of cars because they just couldn't. They had such demand for it that, he would actually give away his designs to other manufacturers and allow them to copy it just to satisfy some of the demand. I think I read somewhere there were about 103 Roadsters that were pretty active during the 1950s into the 60s. It was just a kind of a really amazing era for those cars. And then, they were all kind of, what's interesting too is they were known for racing in Indy, but most of these constructors were based out of Los Angeles area in California. And so you had Watson, you had Frank Curtis, Lasovsky's shop was out there. So these hot rodders out in California started creating all these radical, Indy cars that were so dominant, and they just went to Indy for May.
Did they all use the same steering boxes, or was that just?
Yeah, I know the Watsons did. They're all I think it's a Halibran steering box, but I'll have to double check. But that steering gear was kind of special he used one type for each of. He used one type for the Watsons. You'll see some different hood configurations. Like I think the other Watson that's out in the hallway there has a bit of a different hood scoop configuration. I don't know if that was just a personal preference or what they were trying to accomplish with that. But really, that's just kind of the smaller change. Other than that, the whole formula, stayed the same, and it's pretty amazing if you think about it today that for a car to make it, 9 years without really making any kind of change. Maybe 911s are a little bit that way, but even they kind of got more subtle changes than that. And even down to, I don't know if you can notice, I always find it interesting that the steering being outside the car. It's just so rudimentary and simple, but then also I guess that's kind of what helps make it a little bit bulletproof.
I think it's pretty lightweight, really. 1,200 pounds, was it?
It's about 1,650 pounds, I think. Yeah, dry. Yeah, and then you got a large fuel tank. I think they made it about 3.5 miles a gallon on the fuel, and I think the tire wear matched pretty well the fuel burn. So by the time you came in for fuel, you needed both fuel and tires, which was a whole process because they didn't you weren't using the guns, you were hammering the things on and off, and it was quite something. My understanding is when it raced, it did not have a bladder, and then we put a bladder. Then a bladder was put in at one point, which then dissolved from the methanol. So now it does not have a bladder, and so it's. But yeah, I think it would have just kind of been in there, as far as I'm aware.
Staying with the fuel, the cap looks like it's 2. Can you spin that?
Mm-hmm. So you can probably get it on camera. Yeah. Yeah, and one's going to let air in. One's fuel in, one's air out. So.
Did none of the Watsons crash in the Indianapolis races?
Oh, they crashed like crazy. So a lot of them have been a lot of them have been restored. From that. They went through a phase there where there were some pretty significant crashes in these cars, and that's a lot the challenge, especially in collecting like what we do with race cars, right? So you look at some of the street cars out there, and what's original. So does it mean it's been painted, or does it mean you've kind of sanded a fender or added Bondo, you've redone the interior? Well, when it comes to race cars, the thing may have hit the wall at 150 miles an hour. Some of the other ones, a frame rail might have gotten tossed to the side and replaced with something else, and then it goes out and races again. No one thinks of anything about the parts you took off because they weren't worth anything at the time. Well, now that collecting is kind of a financial pursuit for some, and there's money involved with it, next thing you know, they find these old parts in the garage, and they assemble a car out of them, and then they say, here's your car. They throw it in a barn, put some hay on it, and say, hey, look what I found. And that's a lot of what you're trading in when you're trading race cars. Is kind of the car that's widely acknowledged to be the car. So, but it's not unheard of that other cars pop up and claim to be the same thing. We see it all the time with our Brumos cars. There's more Brumos cars in the world today than there ever were when we were actively racing. I think Bill Warner said it best with 917s. He said, there were 25 917s to begin with. He goes, and sadly, only 37 remain today. And and I think that's a little bit of what we kind of work with. So buying and selling and owning and caring for these race cars is a very kind of unique experience. Yes. That would be an accurate motor. As far as all the full drivetrain, I'm not sure. It went through a different life for a while, and yeah. So this is an authentic car. Typically, what we'll have is going to be fairly authentic stuff. There's plenty of kind of dicey things out there, but period correct, and I believe this one's correct to the actual car.
Mm-hmm.
Is the drive shaft inside a tube, or is that
Yeah, no, it's yeah, it's inside the tube. Still gets hot. Um, no. Yeah, and that's, when you put yourself kind of in their place. Let me see if I can spin this around so you can see it. This turntable is fantastic. Yeah, so there you go. You can see it in there. Yeah, so you're sitting, you're sitting here, and your left leg is right there by it. And when you come up and look at it in here, you'll see the gearbox fluid actually on the floorboard that would coat your shoes. And look, it's, for the most part, you're just on the throttle the whole time. So it's a high-low gearbox. So you're just leaving the pits is really the only time you're shifting gears. But sometimes keeping your foot on that throttle takes everything you got. You'll see when you look in, there's like a tow hook just to help you keep your foot on the gas, because it keeps throwing you back every time you accelerate. Yeah, it's kind of something. And the air hitting you, I can't imagine what air hitting you in the face at 170 miles an hour and one of those must be like, and just the sheer noise of it. You got a burning hot exhaust pipe just to your left. A lot of danger left there.
Brandon, you mentioned obviously the Peugeot. We'll talk about the Watson. Let folks know about some of the other cars in your collection that are like highlights.
Yeah.
Because when we visited, I was blown away with the cars that you see because of the rarity and what they are. Just kind of
Yeah.
share with our folks what some of those are.
Yeah, it's like I say, it's so wide ranging, but it's we have a 2.9 Alpha Lungo Spider, so it's a 1939 Alfa Romeo. It's kind of the belle of the ball. It's the one that everybody just kind of like clings to. We're fortunate enough to have a variety of kind of Porsche cars, so a Porsche 917K, Porsche 908, 935. One of my favorite cars, we have a Bugatti Type 35. Those are kind of the winningest race cars ever. I think they won something like 2,000 races between 1925 and 1930. Spectacular cars. If you ever have one here, you could just look at it forever. They just look light and kind of a remarkably fast. One of my favorite stories about Bugatti is there's a story about he had a Type 35 owner who complained that when it was cold, his car wouldn't start. And so his answer was, well, surely if you can afford a Type 35, then you can afford a heated garage. And so that was kind of that was the answer to that problem. But yeah, we have just kind of a really interesting variety of things. The road cars that we have, it kind of goes back to what I say about the innovation that takes place in race cars that then ends up in road cars. We have a Duesenberg, which the Duesenberg brothers were heavily active in racing, especially the early Indy oval racing. They actually produced Bugatti-designed 16-cylinder engines for World War I for aircraft. After which, basically, you cut it in half, and there's your Duesenberg motor. We have a Cord L29. Which is an evolution of the Duesenberg, but it incorporates a front-wheel drive system that Harry Miller designed for his race cars, kind of bringing that kind of connection in. On the Porsche side, we have supercars. So Porsche develops their technologies in two main ways. Either it's on the racetrack or through these kind of hypercars or supercars. So we have Porsche 959 that actually belonged to Helmut Bott, who was in charge of that program. And we have a Porsche 918 Spider. 918 Spider is how they developed a lot of their charging and battery technology that they're using now today and their Taycan electric vehicles. And so it's kind of interesting to follow. One of the things that kind of inspires me is where we are with this electric mobility and going to some alternative fuels. Every time I walk through a museum like this or our museum and I look at the older cars, I realize that we've kind of reset the clock. And so, we're kind of where we were in the early 1900s with internal combustion, that's kind of where we are now with our alternative fuels, and trying to develop an infrastructure and determine what, with all these different market entrants and ideas. So it kind of gives you a different perspective that, maybe things aren't so different after all. It's kind of makes it more relevant. Yeah, that's actual gold leaf that they would have used. So, yeah, no, that's what they would have used as the original. This is a point I made earlier, and I can't make it enough. And I just think it's important to remember it. When you look at these older things, you see a level of kind of craftsmanship and durability that existed for a long, long time, and it seems that it seems to have gone away quite a bit in our digital age. The things I do, I point to my watch, and I realize I'm not going to give my iWatch to my son when he graduates college, right? Like it's when the next one comes out, I'll probably get that and just upgrade and get rid of it. And that's kind of where we've gone with cars and a lot of things. And so, my hope is that, and through doing things like this and through experiencing it, that we kind of all develop an appreciation for a craftsmanship and durability that, is kind of unfortunately too rare anymore.
Speaking in general, museum cars, how often are they started?
I would say not often enough, but as often as we can. So typically, we'll have a plan, and then something will come up, and then we'll change the plan. So say it'll be time for this car to be gone through, but another car gets invited to a car show. So we bring that car in to get ready and running for the car show, and then we discover that just through doing maintenance, it needs all kinds of things, and so this one gets put off. So you get that one started, but you kind of get off track, and so goals kind of go out the window. We try to start them all at least maybe I'd say once a year is about right. The other thing to keep in mind too is the way that they sit. They kind of have to be put away in a certain way so that they don't eat themselves up from the fuel. So we have to pickle them and try to neutralize the fuel that's in them. So you drain the fuel and you put in basically Marvel mystery oil into the fuel system to try to kind of make it less corrosive. And you have to undo that process when you go to start it up. So it makes it harder to just run out and start. And on the flip side, there's cars like our 918 Spider that's a hybrid car that we're all kind of learning from, because that car can't sit. And so as we go down the road, and this is going to be interesting for kind of collectors as we get into these hybrid collector cars, is there's usually a mileage allergy that comes with these high dollar kind of collector cars. Well, that can't be the case for hybrids because it's totally unhealthy for them to sit there and not move. So we make it a point to drive that car more often. I would say the cars that we're able to start get run more often, and things like this is typically kind of special events or once a year.
Might be a dumb question. What happens to the hybrid cars if you don't run them? What makes it?
It's the battery basically atrophies is the only way I know how to put it. So I don't know if you ever get a new electric appliance or even a new phone. They tell you to drain it all the way down and charge it all the way back up. And it's the same thing with the hybrid cars. If the battery system is not being used and the battery's not being charged, then it'll fail to hold the charge like it did. And if that battery goes, that's an investment. And I guess there's one other thing I wanted to touch on while we're talking kind of like general car collecting, general museum cars. It's been interesting to kind of follow a lot, kind of an evolution in how people are approaching restoration work. I think it's been, historically you would get a car in whatever kind of shape it's in, and you would just take it all apart and try to make it as beautiful as you could and send it out. It's been interesting to see that kind of within the car society, it's changed now to where less perfect examples are now being appreciated more for their originality than are, say, cars that are restored. We have cars in our collection that are, I would say totally over-restored. They're nicer than they were new. Now, in one example, it's the only one remaining, right? So, that choice was made. It's better to keep the car there. But it's been kind of refreshing and interesting to see the thought process being that when you do repair something to that extent, that you're erasing the history that that car has had. And so you make that decision in perpetuity once you've done that. And so now what's kind of become more preferred, and it's kind of where we try to be where we can, is they do what they call sympathetic restorations, more where you're trying to slow the effects of time, you know, whether it be a leather tear or interior wear, then totally undo those effects of time, and just recognizing that any of those tears or nicks or dings or whatever it is, that's just a symbol of the actual life that vehicle has led, and it makes it more authentic than, say, perfect. Yeah. Yes.
So 2-speed gearbox?
2.
So with the gearing, did they push start these cars?
No, well, you could have. Yeah, you would have used the rod, but you could, and you got the bar in the back. We've been known to do that. Sometimes it's just easier if you got room to do it. And believe it or not, you know, once you get them warmed up, they're actually really amazingly well behaved and easy to manage.
Unrelated to the car, back
Sure.
you mentioned that David Donahue.
Mm-hmm.
Is that Mark Donahue's son?
It is. And, oops, sorry. Mark Donahue, I guess most people would know him, but he was a very successful racing driver. He was known for driving a lot of things. He taught Hurley Haywood a lot about driving Porsche 917-10s. The 917, it's basically the American version of the 917 that you would have seen at Le Mans, but they were heavily turbocharged. You know, ours makes about 1,200 horsepower. It'll go 0 to 100 in 3 seconds, and 0 to 100 back to 0 in less than 10 seconds. All while your feet are out in front of the front axle. You have 2 50-gallon fuel tanks on either side of you. But they were terrifying to drive. They had awful turbo lag. You would have to basically go throttle down mid-corner and hope you were pointed straight by the time the boost kicked in. And there was like an art to driving it, and Mark was kind of the 917 whisperer. And so he was an amazing guy. And so we were fortunate in 2003 when we went prototype racing in Grand American Series. His son came on and drove with us, and he was a great guy.
Okay, any more questions? Okay. You might as well go ahead.
Yeah, please.
Yeah.
What year was it that you drove it before?
The last time, it would have been 2015 or so. I did it 2015, maybe 2014. The years are kind of a blur now. But they do it the week before. So it would have been like the Saturday, the Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Since Penske has taken over it, I think there's been a kind of re-examination of liabilities and those types of issues. So they've kind of reeled it in some. So we're hopeful that it kind of goes back to what it was, because it was a great thing for spectators to be able to see and experience, and honestly for, you know, we're still fortunate enough to have some of the generation that were there when this happened, you know, when these cars would have run, and you know, from a younger generation to see them and something that was so meaningful to them, you know, it's important. And so, you know, hopefully we can get back out there and do that and not let laws get in the way, or lawsuits anyway.
Okay, any more? If not, I'd like to say thank you very much. Really
Thank you all for your
appreciate it.
time. I really appreciate it. Thank you.